What we're seeing right now is the scene in London. Across the world, a reaction has come in. Sympathy for the people of London, sympathy for the British government coping with this, and of course people asking across the world why this has happened and who is behind it. Let's now cross to François Hollande, who we understand is about to speak.
During the afternoon, I heard about the terrorist attack that occurred in London today. On behalf of France and the French people, I express my solidarity to the British people and to Prime Minister Theresa May, who was herself in Parliament when the events happened and was forced to evacuate hastily. I am still unsure as to whether there are any French victims or people involved, so we are trying to establish the gravity of the situation. We know the terrorist was killed, but we do not know how many victims there are.
The reaction from the French President, François Hollande. Let's cross to Brussels to hear from our correspondent, Maeve McMahon, who is there for us. Maeve, thanks for being with us. Tell us the reaction that we have to the incident in Brussels.
Well, from the EU institutions, we've had no on-the-record reactions as of yet. Although they've heard from police in London that they're very much treating this as a terrorist incident, there's been no word yet from neither Jan-Claude Juncker, the Commission President, nor Donald Tusk, the Council President, or anyone from the European Parliament at that matter. We did, however, hear from Julian King. He's the UK Commissioner who's in charge of security, in fact, and he said he's monitoring the situation very carefully and all his thoughts are very much in London. And the incident actually took place just a few minutes after he was giving a keynote speech in front of a number of policy experts when it comes to the area of security. In fact, they were just launching a publication that they've been working on over the last year, which is called The Challenge of Jihadist Radicalisation. Now, although he didn't refer to the background of today's instance, he just referred that although the situation in Europe is gradually getting a little bit better, he said the threat of terrorism, be it from Islamist religious fundamentalists or right-wing extremists, is still very much there. And what is needed is a lot more data sharing. He said now at the moment it's just goodwill really that member states are using in order to share data. He did also mention, and it's been coming up a lot at talks you go to here in Brussels when it comes to countering terrorism, is that many of these attacks can't be prevented. It's a point that was brought up already there in studio by Rob Parsons, that the new weapons are being used like just a lorry or a car or a knife. So it doesn't matter what new legislation or what new ideas are brought up in books like this or by institutions and policymakers here in Brussels, that these kind of attacks can take place anywhere and anyhow. But looking at the images coming from London this afternoon are very much on the minds of everyone here in Brussels, because as you remember, today, of course, marks 1 year since the atrocities took place in Brussels, when 3 suicide bombs went off, 2 in the airport and 1 in Malbec station, killing 32 people. So there's been a long day here in Brussels of commemorative activities, really calling respect, or remembering the victims, the injured and those that are still suffering, some still in hospital really after those horrific attacks last year.
Maeve McMahon in Brussels, thank you very much indeed. Maeve McMahon, our correspondent there in Brussels, who of course has marked the day over there, a year on since the attacks on the airport and on the metro system in Brussels, which killed over 30 people. 1 year on, of course, Brussels taking stock on that incident. And of course today, here we are with an incident in London where we are told that there could be 2 people dead. 12 people, according to our correspondent Duncan Woodside, hit by a vehicle, a 4x4 vehicle, according to Benedict Pavio, as that crossed Westminster Bridge. This is the scene that you can see right now live in London. Local time 5:25, and the city of Westminster, which is where the Houses of Parliament, the seat of British government, is located, is in lockdown. With me in the studio, Robert Parsons, our International Affairs Editor. Rob, this is a place that I know you know well, I know it well, and clearly it's very shocking to see it in this situation.
Yeah, one can understand immediately why the the man who carried it out would have chosen this particular site. It's in terms of impact, it's high value if you're a terrorist. You know you're going to get an enormous international response. You're hitting at the seat of power in the United Kingdom. It's a massive tourist spot. You know, tourists come from all over the world there. We've heard that there's a possibility that French tourists might have been hurt in this attack. I'm sure there would have been hundreds of other foreigners there at the time it happens. So you're absolutely guaranteed, you know, whether you're part of a small cell operating on this or whether you're just somebody acting by yourself, that if you try and strike there, you're going to get international attention. You also know that you're on a suicide mission because there is so much security in the area that you know perfectly well there's no chance, or very little chance, that you're going to get inside the building, and that there's almost no chance that you're going to come out of it alive. And that seems to be what's happened. We don't know in this particular case. It's not been confirmed by the police whether the attacker, we seem to be talking about a single attacker now, whether he was killed when he was shot or whether he was just injured. But certainly it does look like a suicide mission.
Indeed, and as the saying goes, the hallmarks of possibly the Islamic State group. There have been other incidents, just to remind people, Rob, in London over the past few years. 2016, a device defused in North Greenwich Tube. 2015, the incident at Leytonstone Tube Station, where one man went on a rampage with a knife, stabbing a number of people, and the quotation that was sticking in my mind from that was when the man shouted at this assailant, "You ain't no Muslim, bruv," which I think will sum up the feelings of many people if this turns out to be Islamist related, that this isn't the actions of any people who really have anything to do with religion. And then 2013, Rob, the Lee Rigby incident, which shocked the world when a drummer from the army near Woolwich Barracks was walking in the street where he was mown down by a car, and the two people in that car got out and then hacked him to death, and then spoke very calmly to people who were videoing, using their mobile phones to give their statement and give their piece of why they did it. And of course they're standing there with machetes with the poor man's blood on it already. It's things that shock the world. London, no stranger to horrific incidents.
You missed the biggest one, of course, 2005 with the Al-Qaeda attack on the Underground.
I was trying to get there. But it's London, no stranger to these kinds of incidents. And of course, that was the one that really sticks in everyone's minds, isn't it? Obviously, July 2005, with 52 people dead, 700 injured. This isn't on the same scale yet, that we know of. And of course, we don't know where this comes from, where it goes. But certainly, the questions that are going to be asked now in the seat of power, with Theresa May's there with the Cobra Committee, that's the big emergency, not panic committee, but of course it's the committee to avoid panic and make sure there's a measured response to what goes on. They're going to be asking themselves some very serious questions as to how this has happened.
Yes, you know, I think they'll come to the conclusion that the security services actually responded pretty well. As we were saying earlier on, there's not an awful lot you can do in these situations. You cannot possibly prevent everything of this sort happening. You know, we've seen this in France, we've seen it in Germany, Spain, the United States, and in Britain, and it'll happen again. You know, the question, I think, as I was saying earlier on, is keeping it in perspective, making sure that the measures are there to prevent the majority of these sort of things happening, making sure that the education is in place, that the preventative intelligence measures are in place, that the security service exchanges information properly with other intelligence services around Europe and the United States. That seems to be working, at least in Britain's case. What you can't do is prevent somebody from just going out, getting on the underground with a bomb in his rucksack and exploding it. There's very little you can do. But you have to keep it in perspective. You have to make sure that we don't overreact and play or fall into the trap that's being laid for us by terrorists around the world.
And what those terrorists want, of course, is to change the way that we all live our lives. That's the issue. France, of course, under a state of emergency since the attack on the Bataclan of 2015. That continues. And in spite of that state of emergency, we've had just this past weekend the incident in Saint-Saint-Denis and at Orly Airport, where one man, of course, disarms a female soldier and starts waving the gun around and is eventually shot dead by army officers. Like you say, you can't legislate for everything, you can't prevent everything, but it's that aspect of intelligence that is possibly key, isn't it, to sort of try to get to
I think there are two things that are key. I think the intelligence gathering is obviously extremely important, but it's also important that people are educated, that everything is done to ensure that people aren't tempted, aren't pushed into going down this line. You know, to making them realise that the society of which they're part belongs to them as well as everybody else, that everybody's a part of it, everybody benefits from it in one way or another. If people feel excluded from society, they're likely to take these sort of actions. If people feel that society in some way has rejected them, they're likely to take these sort of measures, perhaps. So I think it's extremely important that the education should work properly, that people should feel part of the society which they belong, but also that obviously the intelligence services should work effectively. And we've seen that, I think, in this particular case. The intelligence has worked, the security response has been impressive, the emergency services clearly have trained for incidents like this, their response was impressive as well.
Okay. This incident, this idea that you're talking about getting people to feel included and feel the society belongs to them rather than them being somehow on the outside and starved of opportunities, starved of money, employment, and starved of all the things that they want. Yeah. This is something that is incredibly difficult to put right, because if you go back generations, there's always been that issue about the haves and the have-nots. Yeah. You know, when I was a kid, it was the North-South divide, you know, sort of like the Thatcher government made Britain into this boom place, and in the north of England where I was brought up, we had nothing. Or that's how it seemed, or that's how it's portrayed. There is another layer that creates the kind of people that carry out these kind of attacks, isn't there? There's something else. There's something else in there, some other kind of disgruntlement, some other kind of anger, which leads to the radicalization that people talk about, which leads to this happening. And I suppose how you try to combat that, you've spoken about education, which is possibly the key thing, isn't it? To give people opportunities to create ways for them to find their path.
Yeah, I mean, there are various different layers of the response. You know, nobody's saying for sure that, but this attack has all the signs of being inspired, at least, by the Islamic State organization.
Yeah.
Part of the effort to destroy the Islamic State organization is happening on a military level in Iraq and Syria at the moment, and elsewhere as well. We've seen it in Libya, we've seen it in Nigeria, but particularly in Iraq and in Syria, where the Islamic State organization is losing a lot of its territory, has been put onto the back foot, is facing, in the very near future, military defeat. But militarily defeating the Islamic State organization doesn't necessarily solve the problem. The Islamic State organization got a response from society in Europe, United States and elsewhere because it reflects something that is wrong in society. Defeating them in Iraq certainly helps, but at the same time we have in United Kingdom, in France, and elsewhere, we've got to address the causes of the problem. And I think we're making serious efforts to do that at the moment, but we're clearly a long way from succeeding. And the proof of that is in the sort of instance we've seen over the last year or so in France, in Germany, in Belgium, and now in the United Kingdom.
Robert Parsons, our International Affairs Editor, I will pause you for a moment and let's put some of your points to Claude Moniquet, who joins us by phone from Brussels. Just to remind people, Claude Moniquet, expert on strategy, security and intelligence, counter-terrorism and the Middle East. Claude, thank you very much for being with us here on France 24. We always appreciate your time. What is your reaction, sir, to what we're seeing in London right now?
My reaction is that we knew for a while that London and UK, the United Kingdom, was one of the targets of the Islamic State, and globally speaking of all the jihadist movements, but specifically of the jihadist state, of the Islamic State. Of course, France is the primary target in Europe, but at the second level, or maybe ex aequo with France, you have UK. We know that they try to recruit people to commit commit terrorist attacks in London the last 2 years, but they failed. They didn't find the good people, if I may say. It seems that today they succeed, and it's very clearly, very likely ISIS-inspired attack. Even if ISIS didn't decide of the attack, even if the man who committed the attack had acted on his own and decided himself his targets, which is possible, it's clearly inspired by ISIS.
Claude, a senior police officer told me that it takes one occasion for the terrorists to be lucky, but of course the intelligence agencies, the police, the services are constantly foiling plots to mount terror attacks in Europe. How big is the problem, Claude? What is the amplitude of what we are facing? And how frequently are these kind of attacks foiled, stopped by the services?
You are completely right. We were used in the service I was in, and we were used in all the police and intelligence service in the world, I think, to say, as you mentioned, that the bad guy have just to be lucky once, and we have to be lucky 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, all the year. So what we face today is a very high level threat because we have thousands of suspects in Europe. We have thousands of people linked to the Islamic State ideology or to Al-Qaeda ideology in Europe. And a lot of those people, thousands of other people, are really dangerous. So that makes a very, very huge threat to counter for the services. And the specific threats we have today, we can say we have two kinds of threats. We have the threats of the returnees, the people who were in Syria and Iraq, who were trained to jihad, and who came back in Europe to commit terrorist acts, like the terrorists of November 13, of March 22 in Paris and Brussels. And we have also all those people who tried to go to Syria, but were failed and were unable to reach this zone, this area, and who developed also kind of frustration because they were unable to join the Islamic State. So those people also are extremely dangerous.
Claude, in terms of what happens next, in terms of preventing these kind of things, everybody has their theory. But I take it from your perspective, you view it as being about intelligence.
Yes, I think it's mainly a question of intelligence, of exchange of intelligence, of analysis of intelligence, of course, and on very ground intelligence coming from the streets, from the ground, from the groups, from the families, and specifically we need the capacity to link a suspect because we know the global picture and we know that we will have problems for years, but what we lack is the capacity to link this global image to individuals, to say, okay, today this man or those men are dangerous, and maybe the day after it will be another man who is dangerous. For instance, the Israeli intelligence developed for years now a capacity to analyze the behavior of the people on the social media, in their family circles and so on, and they are quite successful. When they spot someone, they see some break in his behavior, they see the way he's talking, the change in the way he's talking, and they focus on him. And usually they are successful. We are not at this level today in Europe, and that's something we need because, of course, the 100% insurance against terrorism doesn't exist anywhere, but we face a so huge problem that we need to develop this capacity to be able to counter as much terrorist act as possible.
And Claude, is that a call I'm hearing? You're not quite stating it, but is it a call I'm hearing for greater cooperation between countries, between intelligence services? I'm thinking of lapses that there have been, within French intelligence, for instance, but also lack of cooperation across the borders.
I do not agree with this point. I think that, of course, when you see an action like this today in London, or what happened in Paris and Brussels a year ago, you may say the system is not working. And it's clear. We faced a failure of the system, a systemic failure. But the cooperation is not so bad. You have a lot of exchange of intelligence, and even tomorrow, if the UK and the UK will leave Europe, and because of Brexit, this cooperation between London and Paris, or London and other European capital, will continue, because policy is one point, is one problem, and security is another problem. And we are used to deal with countries which, even sometimes, we have intelligence cooperation with countries without diplomatic relations with our country. So even when UK will leave the European Union, it will remain a geographical part of Europe and a political part of Europe, and this cooperation will continue. So I don't think this is a problem, but of course we must enhance, we must strengthen this cooperation.
Claude Moniquet, thank you for clearing up that for us, and thank you for giving us more depth on exactly how these things work on an intelligence level. Claude Moniquet, an expert on French intelligence, European intelligence. Let's now bring in another guest to talk about the situation. Domitila Sagramosa joins us from King's College. Domitila is a lecturer in security issues, joining us from London, of course. Thank you very much for being with us. The situation, as you see it, as you've heard, as you've understood it to be, Domitila, what is your reaction to it?
I think it's a great tragedy. We have already some fatalities. Also, a police officer who was stabbed apparently is dead. So this is a real sad day for London. London hadn't had this kind of attack for quite some time, almost 10 years. So it certainly will force the authorities to rethink again. I think I agree with your commentator that the response of all institutions has been quite swift and very good. But certainly there is going to be a lot of analysis of who is this individual, if it was only one or two, what are his or her links to any kind of terrorist organization? Is he a member of the Islamic State, which has been supported and in many ways also logistically, ideologically, the recruitment of these individuals and the support of these kind of attacks. What can be done to trace these networks more effectively? How can the communications be better monitored? I think there's going to be a lot of assessment. This attack occurred at the heart of London, near the Houses of Parliament, so we're talking about a very serious incident.
Are we looking, talking about the monitoring aspects that you were talking about there, are we looking at some kind of compromise that people will have to accept in future, that their privacy will need to be restricted in some way? People get very touchy, and rightly so, about restrictions on their privacy, invasions of their privacy, but faced with these kind of situations, is it something people may have to put up with?
Well, I think this tension between tackling terrorism effectively and protecting civil liberties...
Domitila, I have to interrupt you. The police are speaking in London. We'll come back to you in a moment. Thank you. Let's go to the police
Good evening. My name's Mark Rowley. I'm the National Head of Counter-Terrorism Policing, and I'm also Acting Deputy Commissioner. I want to make a statement about this afternoon's events, and I'm going to try and cover three main areas. What we know about the incident, the ongoing operation, and what London can expect over the coming days. As you know, we've declared this as a terrorist incident, and the Counter-Terrorism Command are carrying out a full-scale investigation into the events today. The attack started when a car was driven over Westminster Bridge, hitting and injuring a number of members of the public, also including 3 police officers on their way back from a commendation ceremony. The car then crashed near to Parliament, and at least one man, armed with the knife, continued the attack and tried to enter Parliament. Sadly, I can confirm that now 4 people have died. That includes the police officer who was protecting Parliament, and one man we believe to be the attacker who was shot by a police firearms officer. The officer's family have been made aware. At least 20 people have been injured. As part of long established and well-rehearsed plans, Parliament has been locked down, and the Met responded in line with our plans for a marauding terrorist attack. That response included uniformed and specialist firearms officers. We now, of course, have an ongoing operation, And whilst we currently believe there was only one attacker, I'm sure the public will understand us taking every precaution in locking down and searching the area as thoroughly and exhaustively as possible. And I know that the officials working within Parliament and public in the area completely understand the need to do this, and I thank them for their patience and their support. This investigation has the full weight and expertise of the Counter-Terrorism Command behind it. And if there are people who saw the events unfold today that haven't yet spoken to us, I would urge them to get in touch. A crime scene will remain in place in the affected areas in Westminster, and it will understand it's vital we carry out a painstaking investigation to recover all the possible evidence. Looking forward, throughout the rest of the day, including when people are commuting home, and indeed over the days that follow, the people of London will see extra police officers armed and unarmed on our streets. This includes our officers working longer hours and extra shifts alongside our colleagues from British Transport Police and the City of London. And of course, as you're aware, we can call on the support of the military should we need to at a future point. We are also in the process of opening up our Casualty Bureau to help those people who are worried about friends and family who may have been caught up in the attack. Furthermore, we're reaching out to communities and community leaders across London to reassure them. Our strength as a city depends on our ability to stand together at such terrible times. If anyone sees anything suspicious or anything that causes concern, please do contact us, don't hesitate. My thoughts are with all those who have been affected by today's attack, and as a service, we've lost one of our own as he acted to protect the public and his colleagues. This is a day we planned for, but we hope would never happen. Sadly, it's now a reality. We will continue to do all we can to protect the people of London.